Hello, and welcome to Inside Cancer Careers, a podcast from the National Cancer Institute. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler. I work at the NCI in the Center for Cancer Training. On Inside Cancer Careers, we explore all the different ways that people join the fight against disease and hear their stories. Today, we're talking to Dr. Leah Hubbard and Dr. Eric Johnson Chavarria, who tell us about the role of an NCI program director and how they came to choose this work. Then we speak to Dr. Diana Ng from the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, who will share the strategies that helped her succeed in getting a KO8 Career Development Award. Listen through to the end of the show to hear our guests make some interesting recommendations and where we invite you to take your turn. You probably know that the NCI gives out billions of dollars in funding for cancer research to scientists across the US and beyond. But what you may not know is that we have teams of scientists who oversee the programs through which these funds flow. These are our program officers or program directors. It's a pleasure to welcome two of them from NCI to the show today to talk about their work. We have Dr. Leah Hubbard, program director in NCI's Translational Research Program in the Division of Cancer Treatment and Diagnosis. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And also with us is Dr. Eric Johnson Chavarria. He's the program director in the Structural Biology and Molecular Applications branch in the Division of Cancer Biology. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, let me start with you, Leah. What is a program officer exactly?
So program officers are essentially the scientific administrators at NIH who manage our extramural grants and contracts. So what we do daily is we advise applicants and grantees. We help to make funding recommendations, monitor grant progress, and what's really fun is that we get to help write concepts for new funding opportunities.
So since you mentioned concepts, Leah, what exactly is a concept in this context?
In this context? Yeah, so there are gaps in our research portfolios that we want to fill, new emerging research fields, and we as program directors will help to write concept addressing those areas and those needs. And we'll draft them up as funding opportunities that eventually go through all the different processes at NIH to get published. Then you all will see it as an FOA or funding opportunity announcement and can apply for those for money.
So it's kind of the NIH saying, hey, this is an area that we think is important. If you're not already working in it, maybe you should move into it. Or if you are, then send us your grants.
Absolutely.
What is your portfolio, Leah? I said something briefly, but what kind of grants are in there?
So I manage multi-project grants. So it's like grants that have a bunch of R1s and cores and other components all in one. And this is again, as mentioned, the Division of Cancer Treatment and Diagnosis. And the portfolio that I manage are essentially SCORES or P50 awards in translational cancer research. And the grants that I manage are in brain cancer and head and neck cancer. And then I also have two U19s that are in our glioblastoma therapeutics network. And this network is focused on drug development, so we can bring promising new agents into clinical trial.
That's good stuff. I used to work on glioblastoma myself when I was still doing research. Yeah, back in the day, a long time ago now. Eric, how about your portfolio?
Yeah, so mine's dealing with cooperative agreements, which are UO1 mechanisms. And this is through the Physical Sciences Oncology Network. So spanning many different cancer types, but really trying to bring the physical approaches to cancer research.
So that's interesting. And I think when I read your bio, I saw that you kind of started off in a scientific area that isn't traditionally associated with cancer research. So can you tell me a little bit about that? And how did you come to work at NCI and do the work that you do?
My experience goes back to cytoskeleton research. I did a lot of microfluidics, single cell trapping, and automated systems. I took that approach and wanted to kind of expand beyond my postdoc in cytoskeleton research to go and think about policy. And that's how it came to be through the AAA Science Tech Technology Policy Fellowship Program that led me to Washington, D.C., which connected me to NIH.
Fantastic. How about you, Leah?
My background's in immunology. I did my PhD at the University of Michigan, and I studied lung macrophage host defense after bone marrow transplant. So very different from cancer research. So the great thing about NIH is that it allows you to be an expert and a generalist, and it helps you to transfer a lot of the skills you're learning in grad school and as an independent researcher to your scientific portfolio.
So to be a program officer, you obviously have to have a doctorate in science. You also done postdoctoral research, or is that more optional?
What's interesting is that those guidelines have actually changed a little bit. So the recent OPM guidelines are actually allowing for anyone with 4 years of applicable educational experience, as well as independent research training to apply to be a program officer. So it's not now limited.
Interesting. And you slipped an acronym in there, OPM, the Office of
Personnel Management.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, our listeners may not have yet memorized all the NIH acronyms. I'm working on them myself still. So interesting. So, Eric, you did research and now you're doing this kind of work. What are the skills that were transferable from your research days to your program director stage?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm more of a very problem-solving oriented person, and I like to work with others. So when you talked about team science early on, really what I like to do is bring physical scientists, physicists, mathematical engineers with cancer biologists, oncologists. And early on, what really got me into NCI was working with my supervisor at the time, Jennifer Couch, on innovation labs, really bridging the gap between disparate fields and bringing them to immersive workshops to really try to push the envelope in some of these intractable problems in cancer. So,
interesting. What about you, Leah? What have you brought from the bench to your job today that's helpful?
Yeah, I thought those are really important insights, Eric. I think what's really big, especially for what I'm doing now, is the ability to innovate and problem solve in order to carve out a new area of investigation. So that's essentially what you're doing when you're in your PhD program and you're writing your dissertation. You're carving out that new research field and expanding it. And that's what you have to do as a program officer, but in a different way when you're writing new concepts or a funding opportunity announcement. So innovation and problem solving, and then, of course, the typical things like writing, teamwork, and presentation skills. Those are used on a daily basis, and that's something that you really hone in on in graduate school. So.
Yeah, so you still get to use your science brain. That's, I guess, cool.
Absolutely.
So what did you have to learn, though? What was new, or did you have gaps that you needed to think about as you took on this role?
So obviously you come in, you know the science, you know how to communicate, you know how to innovate, but knowing all those administrative aspects that go into managing research grants, that is a big challenge. There are so many policies, so many regulations and aspects of budgets and financial management that you learn along the way. There's some training for these things, but other things you do learn on the job or from your colleagues are always a really big help. So.
What about you, Eric?
Yeah, I agree with what Leah mentioned. So there's quite a bit of training, and there's a different aspect to doing it early on. And then as you actually get more immersed in going back to do it again, you continue to pick up kind of these nuances in terms of how we kind of go through and review these grant applications and make sure they're progressing well, versus we're funding them. So all that played together and working with your colleagues, I think, has been extremely important. I was welcomed by the division when I came in as a fellow and really got immersed in what they were doing and learning from them.
Now, interesting, both of you mentioned that your portfolios have bigger grants with multiple investigators, networks. That strikes me as a really sort of thing that's much more important these days than it maybe was even a couple of decades ago. Tell me a little bit about your perspective on how multi-investigator cooperative research projects have become very important.
So I'm excited for that question. So we continue to really try to bridge some of our investigators, both in different fields, to really come together. And we see this approach because we've seen it in research and in past studies. We're really having these diverse mindsets, approaches, really coming together to think about these problems and really taking these techniques from other fields and really applying them to either biological aspect or cancer specifically. And I think it's very important as we go forward, really showing how this basic understanding can lead to some of these new novel therapeutics and technologies.
Yeah, Leah, you said you manage SPORE grants and other groups. Why does NCI create those groups?
Yeah, absolutely. So the SPOREs they came from patient advocates who really went forward to Congress and said that we need to make sure that we're doing translational research as far as cancer is concerned to reach the patient at the end of the day. What is the impact going to be on patient care? And so when we're talking about these multi-project grant mechanisms, especially for translational research, what our data show and what our analysis show is that the team science approach is really the most productive approach in terms of producing the most publications and citations and even reaching their human endpoints or getting to the clinic, impacting patient care. So really putting together these diverse investigator teams with multidisciplinary teams really helps to drive the field forward much faster than if it was just an independent researcher or ROM.
So the old sort of trope of a researcher puttering away in their own lab by themselves, maybe there's probably still folks who kind of work in that mode, but a lot of people seem to be working in this new way of coming together and pooling their skills. I mean, that's exciting because I think it opens up a lot of possibilities for people with different skill sets and interests to work together on these problems.
Absolutely. Okay.
So that makes me think that communication must be really a key thing. And now I know that you both in your role work with scientists, both as they are working towards submitting a grant, and then once they have a grant, you continue to work with them. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like, Eric?
Being a part of it from the outside and looking in now, working with colleagues to understand the nuances of how these grants are put forward, it's really eye-opening. As trainees, we see this limited view set, seeing it from the other end and understanding all the ramifications in terms of budgets and how those apply, I think has gone a long way in terms of my perspective and thinking about how we can continue to build upon, even now with our Equity Council, making sure that we're hitting these kind of milestones in our diversity, equity, inclusion, addressing all those needs as well.
Leah, how about you? You're talking to scientists all the time. What do you tell them?
That is a huge cornerstone of my activities, especially with the spores, because with the P50, that mechanism itself requires that you have a lot of interaction with the applicant and grantee if they are funded. So I'd say the main way that I'm interacting with scientists that are trying to obtain funding is through pre-application consultations, which we like to call pre-apps. And these are meetings that we have with investigators to go over their ideas, their proposals, and generally they're formal. They can be 3 hours long, or they're informal. We're just getting phone calls or emails to have these discussions. So, and I have to put a little plug in here. Not everybody knows this out in extramural. If they're interested in applying or have an idea, to reach out to a program officer in your area of interest to talk about your research, talk about your application. And if you've already gone through review, reach out to the program director to talk about those critiques. We're here to help you and support you. So that's a huge way that we're interacting with applicants.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, that's very, very important. And I agree, it's underappreciated. Even in fellowships and career development awards, we love to hear from junior scientists who are thinking of applying. So absolutely. So what's the best part of the job of being a program director, Eric?
There's so many aspects. I think working with my colleagues, having the flexibility I need to be able to manage day to day, attending conferences, as Leah mentioned, really immersing yourself with the investigators and what they're doing and some of the challenges they're facing. In my branch, structural biology, molecular applications branch, we really try to understand the technology gaps and how we can address those for our division of cancer biology. So it's really important to understand and hear some of the new science that's coming out, some of the challenges, how we can connect them with those who are actually making kind of advances in these spaces.
And Leah, what would you say is the best part of your day?
It's always so different. Every day is a different day. I can say the best part about my job might be more helpful. So I would say the best part of my job is when we get to make that phone call to applicants that we've been working with for years on end over amended applications. And I finally get to make that phone call that they're going to be awarded a SPORE application. That is such an emotional experience to be on the other end of that line to tell them, and just to know that everything that you've helped them with to guide them through that process has been fruitful, and that you get to walk them through the next 3-5 years, however they're going to be funded, through the next phase and seeing how their research evolves. That is one of the most rewarding parts. And
I wonder what the most challenging aspect is. Might it be the other kind of phone call you have to make from time to time?
When you have to let somebody know they're not going to be funded, and also because I mentioned about how we have to write concepts, and I would say that is a huge challenge, figuring out how you're going to address that gap in the research portfolio. There's so many research areas that are understudied, or when we talk about our workforce, areas that are folks that are underrepresented. And working with all the different offices at NIH, budgets, legal offices, our grants office, to make sure that we're complying with policy when we're trying to address these challenges, it's been really difficult, but obviously worthwhile once you get that announcement done or that initiative underway. So.
Yeah, a lot of work goes into those funding opportunity announcements, a lot more than you might think, because NIH is a complex place. Eric, what about you? What are the biggest challenges you face?
I think some of the biggest challenges is really trying to look ahead of what's coming. I think by the time we go through our review of our science, try to get the FOA out, especially with technology, we're already maybe a few years behind of where the current, advanced stages are. So we're really trying to think about long-term, getting ahead of the curve where we can really focus our efforts has been the challenge. And so it's really talking with others, seeing some of these scientific workshops that come out, understanding the outcomes of those. I think in the effort to push for NIH is making our workshops more transparent has been really key in really understanding and having others be involved in what we're doing to really push the envelope. Other than that, the challenges, I think what's rewarding part is, working with the junior investigators. So as we've seen in some of our larger U54 mechanisms, some of those trainings that have come out of there have been successful and really like what they're doing in terms of physical sciences and are now applying for their first U01. So seeing that continuum of both this career development and now success going forward as an independent investigator has been really rewarding from that aspect.
I can imagine. Fantastic. Then in closing, I wonder if people listening to us right now are wondering if they themselves could do program work of the kind that you do. What would your advice be? What would your guidance be on how they might explore this or follow the paths that you both took? Eric?
While not impossible, there's definitely the global announcements are out there. I think USC Jobs is its own hurdle in its own regard. But with that said, I think a lot of these programs, whether it's the NCI Communications Fellowship, AAAS, PMF, are all ways of getting your foot in the door and getting the experience firsthand before, making a decision across many of the agencies we have here, especially NIH. So I think being able to come from that, whether from grad student or postdoc, and to make that leap into the program policy area, AAAS for me has been a huge reward in that regard and just allow me to see beyond my current horizon as a postdoc and what was possible.
You mentioned PMF, that's the Presidential Management Fellowship?
Yes, that's correct.
That's great. Leah, the last word to you. What would your advice be to our listeners?
Echoing a lot of what Eric was mentioning, those fellowships are so key to helping you get those transferable skills to work in program. But I would say what actually helped me get to where I am today is doing informational interviews. I hope that that term is familiar for the folks that are listening, but when you do those interviews, you're meeting with folks informally to learn about their background, how they got where they are. So, find folks that are working in program, meet with them, ask them who you'd recommend that you can talk to next. And this is going to let you know if you really actually want to work in this area. And then, as Eric mentioned, there are a number of fellowship and job opportunities you can learn about just by engaging with folks that are working in this area.
Well, thank you both and for joining us. And I wonder if you'd be okay with us putting your email addresses in the show notes in case people want to reach out to you for an informational interview, perhaps.
Absolutely. Be happy to.
Well, thank you. Let's take a quick break to alert our listeners to an upcoming opportunity. In April, we will be at the annual meeting of the American Association for Cancer Research, AACR, in Orlando to share about how NCI supports cancer research training. With me today are two colleagues who can tell us more. First, Erica Ginsberg, Director of the Office of Training and Education. Erica, what will you be talking about at our AACR session?
Well, NCI is known primarily for funding cancer research across the nation, but there are also numerous fellowships available to conduct basic, clinical, or genomic and population-based research at one of the 3 NCI campuses in Maryland. My team and I help take care of our trainees on these campuses. At AACR, you will hear about training opportunities, as well as some of the career exploration and professional development resources provided to trainees within the intramural research program.
That sounds great, Erica. Thank you. Let's turn to Naz Zahir, the Director of the Cancer Training Branch. Naz, what will you be sharing in the session?
I will be at AACR with several colleagues from the branch. My group will have informative presentations on NCI funding opportunities, including fellowships and career development awards, and they will share tips for preparing strong applications. I will be providing an overview of the session and serve as the session moderator.
Sounds fantastically helpful to people thinking of submitting grants. Thank you. All 3 of us will be at the NCI booth in the exhibit hall from time to time. So come to our session where you can listen and ask questions, and come to the booth and find out more there. We look forward to seeing you all in Orlando in April. Now back to the podcast. So it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Diana Ng from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center to the podcast. Dr. Ng is an assistant attending pathologist, and she specializes in cytopathology and fine needle aspiration biopsies in her clinical practice. And she also develops innovative diagnostic tests for cancer in low-resource settings in her research, combining her interests in public health and health disparities with her skills in pathology. Welcome, Dr. Ng.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, so we met at a conference a few weeks ago, and I was really impressed by a presentation you gave where you told the story of your applying for a career development award from the National Cancer Institute, from NCI. And I wanted you would have a chance to share that advice and the insights you gained with our audience. But before we do that, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your own journey.
Sure. I feel like my path to medicine was kind of meandering, and even research was even maybe more indirect. But when I first started college, I actually wanted to be an English professor and a poet. And I actually was very serious about it, had published a few poems here and there, and really trying. I was actually going to focus on modernist and postmodernist poetry. Of course, true, kind of a little bit stereotypical. My parents said that maybe that wasn't a viable career path. I ended up applying to med school. I was able to get into NYU and stayed in New York, close to family. And that's when I really got involved with immigrant health. And I started kind of developing this passion for public health. With two other medical students, I helped found the health education and literacy program, and also spent my weekends teaching English as a second language in Chinatown. And then I actually didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to go into emergency medicine, and then finally met a mentor who said, maybe pathology would be a good fit, because it seems like I'm a little bit more of a quieter person, but I also like to sit and ruminate. And so I decided to apply to pathology residencies, ended up at University of California, San Francisco. Still had no interest in research at that point, but, as you know, UCSF is a really vibrant research community. And that's where I started getting connected to different mentors who inspired me to look into global health, kind of as a off branch of immigrant health. Mm-hmm. And actually initially wanted to do microbiology. I did a year at the CDC as an infectious disease pathology fellow, and really there saw the intersection between pathology and public health. And I said, this is the career for me at that point. I did a postdoc with Charles Chu as well for a few years. But then I think suddenly there was this pivot where I started to focus a little bit more on cancer. And that really, it just has to do with the mentorship that I had. I met Dr. Catherine Van Loon, who is the director of the UCSF Global Cancer Program. And she was the one who really helped me write my first grants and kind of inspired me to lead my own projects. Before that, I had never actually met a pathologist who was in the global health space, leading their own projects, writing their own grants, and really kind of establishing a career as an independent investigator.
So what exactly is global pathology?
To be honest, I don't really know. No one really knows. It's not really a field, I would say, and there's no formal definition. I kind of use it as a placeholder. For me, what I think it means is really, it's a field of study where we're trying to close gaps in diagnostic services across all economic settings and across all different populations and all different resource levels. So it can be domestic, it can be international, but really just kind of diagnostic equity for cancer in all settings.
Yeah, and I see that you're also involved with Memorial Sloan Kettering's Global Cancer Disparities Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's really MSK's arm of global cancer research. It's a multidisciplinary group led by Dr. Peter Kingham. Most of their work is focused in Nigeria currently. Their mission is really to reduce the disparities in global cancer, or reduce the disparities in cancer, again, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, through education, innovation, and research.
Fantastic. So, Dr. Ng, pathologists have a reputation for paying meticulous attention to detail. I don't know if you agree with this, but I wonder if that was part of what informed your work when you decided to apply for a K, or Career Development Award.
I would hate to generalize, because knowing a lot of pathologists, I think there's a range, and some people are definitely not that focused. But I actually, and my perception of myself versus other people's perception of me is different. I always feel like I'm a disaster. I'm wearing multiple hats at the same time, multitasking all the time. But I do remember as a first year resident, I was at my desk eating a bowl of cherries, and an attending must have been watching me from behind. And he basically said that he could tell what type of resident I was because I ate each cherry using 3 bites. So, first bite was the top of the cherry, second bite was the seed, and then I finished the cherry after that. And he said, if you were the type of person who wasn't as detail oriented or tended to rush into things, you just throw the entire cherry in your mouth and just spit out the pit.
Interesting. So tell me about the process that you engaged in when you decided to apply for this K08 award. Maybe tell us a little bit about what led you to the decision to make the application.
It actually took a while for me to really decide to apply for a K. And I didn't know if I wanted to be a researcher. Was this really kind of the path that I wanted to take? And initially, I was going to apply for the K01 based on just some feedback from my mentors, and they really encouraged me to do this. And I think what ended up happening was, the requirement to be abroad for as long as I had to be for the K01. I just had a child at that point. I said I couldn't do it. So I waited a few months, actually published a little bit more, talked to a few more people. And then I basically decided that, yes, I actually felt like I would benefit from applying for the K08, getting a little bit more training in implementation science. And I felt like for me, this is a very intuitive process where I just felt like this is actually what I needed at the time. I felt like I needed a little bit more training and also needed a little bit more time to develop as a global health researcher, just because I didn't necessarily have that research background. In undergrad, for example, I didn't necessarily have pathology mentors who took the same exact path.
So having made the decision, what were the first steps that you took to get ready for the application? Because you had this slide in your talk. I don't know if you were also a gardener or not, but it was a slide that took you from the seed all the way to the fruit. So clearly you had a long-term plan.
Yeah, it took me probably about 1.5 years. So, as like a former poet, I like to think of things in terms of metaphors. So the seed was planted in 2018. When my mentor first mentioned that I should apply for a K, I took an intro to implementation science course, which kind of helped facilitate the process. And also at the end, we would create a protocol that was amenable to a competitive grant. I started contacting as many mentors and just people who had applied to Ks previously. So I talked to people who were my peers. I was able to get a few Ks to actually review that I thought was really helpful, even if they weren't necessarily in the exact same field. People who had translational research Ks, people who had basic science research Ks, and then also just the workbook from the NIH, the grant application writers workbook. So those are the things that I thought were extremely helpful. So, the workbook, reading other people's Ks, talking to other people who had applied to Ks, and talking to as many potential mentors and then kind of, pre-existing mentors as possible.
Right. And like everybody who applies for grants, whether it's at the career development stage or any time, that you're super busy. You've got all kinds of responsibilities. You already have a full-time job. So time management seems to me like a really important thing, right? How do you integrate this additional work into your workflow in a way that doesn't lead to some kind of a deadline crisis?
I feel like there's always a deadline crisis, especially when you're balancing clinical work as well as research. And then for some people, administrative work. I was a little bit strategic. Well, first of all, I live off of checklists. So I was lucky enough to have a checklist provided by my own institution for, because there's enough people applying for K08s. But actually, I created my own checklist on top of that. Mm-hmm. And in terms of being strategic, I had just moved from a position at UCSF to MSK. And so I took that opportunity where I wasn't quite integrated or ramped up yet in terms of clinical service as well as administrative duties. So there was like a slight lull. So I knew I had about maybe at most 6 to 8 weeks where I could really just focus on writing. So I would say really focused writing took about 2 months, but in reality, I had been kind of writing this all along for the last year, either through papers or through courses or workshopping it with different peers.
So leaving yourself plenty of time and sort of continuously working at it seems to have been a key for you. You also built a team of mentors to help you. Can you tell me a little bit about what role they played, who they were, and how you picked them?
Yeah, I think in terms of my mentorship team, I had quite a large mentorship team, and I don't necessarily know if everyone needs 4 mentors plus additional advisors. But what I did was that I mapped each training goal to each aim, and then each mentor to each training goal and aim. So I had a primary project / MSK mentor who didn't necessarily have expertise in implementation science. So I needed to find someone to fill that goal, since that was a primary career development goal. So I found the implementation science mentor. And then as someone doing global health work, I had a mentor who was local to Tanzania. So that person was a longtime collaborator at Avovola. And then I had a pathology mentor, just someone who could support me if I had any pathology questions. And then finally, because my project mentor, Peter Kingham, primarily worked in Nigeria, I had an external or additional advisor, Catherine Van Loon, who is actually who has expertise in doing research in East Africa. So a lot of this was mapping the mentorship I felt like I needed to the career goals and specific aims of my grant.
Right. So it sounds like you, again, you were quite deliberate and in picking these mentors. I assume you picked them quite early in the process, right?
Everything has to be done very early. I would recommend contacting people, far in advance. Even earlier than 2 months in advance. I think the intensive writing part, can go a little bit quicker, but to get responses from people can be a little bit of a challenge. And then I definitely met with people who, I felt like could have been a potential mentor, but they weren't the best fit. So you have these conversations and you realize that, maybe they won't be a viable mentor.
Right.
So you really
have to audition them a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and then you're auditioning for them as well.
Of course.
And then the other thing is I didn't realize how many letters you needed, and that always takes time.
Right. Okay, so you put all this together. You worked really hard at it for a long time. You submitted it. What happened then?
I submitted, and then I waited. And then I was able to get a score probably 4 months after I submitted, and then I finally got feedback about a month after I got my score. And I think, after I got my feedback, I contacted the program officer. I also contacted my mentors just to kind of get some idea of what the score meant. Because as a first-time NIH grant applicant, I had no idea what the likelihood of actually getting this K would be. Do I have to resubmit? So I think I was lucky enough where I didn't have to resubmit, and I was able to confirm with my program officer that I was fine.
Great news. So what was the impact of the K on your career path? Was it what did it allow you to do?
Well, I'm actually still in the early stages of my K, but actually it's been wonderful. I think it's given me a lot of time to, first of all, really understand and explore and read implementation science frameworks and theory. With the K, I've been able to meet incredible people, get a lot of support kind of within my own department, but also outside the department. For example, I've been working with the WHO's, the World Health Organization's Global Cancer Breast Initiative. And I really think it's because the K has a little bit of cachet. It gives me some legitimacy. I'm an early researcher with the Lancet Breast Cancer Commission, really with a focus on the global gap section. And again, I attribute that to just kind of the K having cachet, but also giving me time to really understand on a more theoretical as well as kind of more complex level the ideas about like global pathology and reducing diagnostic gaps. So I think it's been great. Also, like I said, global pathology is not really a field. It also gives me legitimacy within my own department, because otherwise people think I'm just like off gallivanting internationally and not really doing any work.
Understood. I think you're making it into a field, so congratulations. Just in closing then, I wonder if there's any other advice, maybe something we haven't touched upon yet, that you might give to someone who's listening who is planning their own application.
I would say start early, but also I would always say dream big. when I was first kind of looking into global health, especially as a pathology resident, a lot of people told me that this wasn't a viable career path. It just wasn't a career path at all. And that they saw no role for pathology in global health. I'm like very self-motivated and self-driven. So, whatever project you have in mind, whatever career path you have in mind, a lot of people will be naysayers, just forge forward and forge your own path. So whether it's, the initial stepping stones of a career development award or maybe even a bigger program.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Ng, for sharing your insights and your counsel with our listeners. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now it's time for a segment that we call Your Turn, because it's a chance for our listeners to send in a recommendation that they would like to share. If you're listening, then you're invited to take your turn. Send us a tip for a book, a video, a podcast, or a talk that you found inspirational or amusing or interesting. You can send these to us at ncicc@nih.gov. If you record a voice memo and send it along, we may just play it in an upcoming episode. So now I'd like to invite our guests to take their turn. Let's start with you, Dr. Hubbard.
So I am a huge tennis fan. I don't actually play tennis, but just a really big fan of a spectator. So I just found the podcast actually called Black Spin Global. And I just started listening. You get to follow all the goings on of Black tennis players all around the world and get to hear opinions from the host of the podcast. So I've really been enjoying it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Dr. Johnson.
So I have this book called Superminds that I just picked up. I've had it for quite some time. It came out in 2018. It's subtitled The Surprising Power of People and Computers Thinking Together by Thomas Malone. And what's intriguing about it is it talks about our collective mindset, both with computers and people, and it's showing how diverse thinking approaches really go a long way in terms of this team science and overcoming challenges. And I think it's highly relevant now. As a society, we've faced a few challenges, quite a big one in the past recent years. And now we have other technology advances like ChatGPT, DALL-E for art. It's exciting to think, the next horizon and how we can connect and integrate, on a large scale, or what they call hyperscale in this book. So
fascinating. I love that stuff too. That's a great recommendation. Thank you. And Dr. Ng.
Yeah, I had a friend recommend a really great book recently. I just started it, but it's The Information by James Glick. And it was published, I think, in 2011. So it might be out of date at this point. But James Glick is a science writer and science historian. And this book I found really interesting because he talks about the history of information in the context of information theory and how information shapes the way we think, and also how we have shaped information. How do we break it down? How does it affect how we communicate? And he kind of goes through kind of a series of different scenarios and cultures and to what was his then 2011 present day. But I'm sure things are really different now.
That sounds fascinating. Thank you very much for that. And finally, I'd like to make a recommendation as well. It's a bit old-fashioned, maybe a bit dry, but it's something that helped me when I was starting out. It's a book that most people refer to as Strunk & White after the authors. It's actually called The Elements of Style, and I think it's currently in the 4th edition. It's a short read and gives you some excellent tips on how to write with clarity and conviction, active voice, short sentences. Really helpful, particularly when you're communicating in science. So it was invaluable to me when I started writing in science. And if you're working on your next paper or grant, it might be helpful. Check it out. That's all we have time for on today's episode of Inside Cancer Careers. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests. We want to hear from you. Your stories, your ideas, and your feedback are always welcome. And you're invited to take your turn to make a recommendation that we can share with our listeners. You can reach us at ncicc@nih.gov. Inside Cancer Careers is a collaboration between NCI's Office of Communications and Public Liaison and the Center for Cancer Training. It is produced by Angela Jones and Astrid Masfar and edited by Jeanette Gozer. A special thanks to Lakshmi Grama and Sabrina Islam Rahman. Join us every first and third Thursday of the month when new episodes can be found wherever you listen. Subscribe so you won't miss an episode. I'm your host, Oliver Bogler from the National Cancer Institute, and I look forward to sharing your stories here on Inside Cancer Careers. If you have questions about cancer or comments about this podcast, email us at nci.info@nih.gov or call us at 800-422-6237. And please be sure to mention Inside Cancer Careers in your query. We are a production of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, National Cancer Institute. Thanks for listening.